I'm a grateful, enthusiastic, and very, very active member of the Al-Anon family groups. My name is Jack Carpenter. Good morning. Thank you for your hospitality. You know, it's when you do a little bit of this and people introduce you, sometimes by the time they get done, there's really nothing left for me to say. Just, give me my crown and my bouquet and I'll be on my way. But simple is better. The highest that we ever get around here is member in good standing. I'm a member in good standing in Al-Anon. I have been so for a little over 22 years. I suit up, I show up, I take commitments, I sit in the front row. I'm a front row guy, not out of anything that makes me more spiritual than anybody else in the room. I just have a narrow attention span. If I'm sitting in the back, I'd be taking everybody's inventory between me and the speaker, so I just sit up front. I'm not here because I'm well. I'm here just saving my life. And Barb, I think, was the person, I don't think I've met her this weekend, who originally asked me to come and speak with you. I want to thank her for that very kind invitation. And my host, Steve, who's not here this weekend because he has other commitments, I met him yesterday and we went out he took me on a guided tour around the town and we went over and saw the game preserve and he took me to the Three Crabs and we had a late lunch and early dinner, if you will, overlooking the water out there and just really beautiful. The countryside's beautiful. The people have been very nice. And what I need to tell you is that, physically I arrived here yesterday. I got here just as Keith was starting his workshop, and I sat through the workshop and got a whirlwind tour of the countryside and went to lunch and came back and heard Candace last night, who did a terrific job. And, then I spent an hour on the phone last night talking with a guy that I sponsor who's, among the options we discussed was multiple homicides as a solution to his problem. And then got up this morning and went and got a cup of coffee. And I really just didn't physically arrive here. I mean, physically I was here, but mentally I hadn't gotten here yet. And I sat down in the coffee room this morning and I got a reminder of why it is that we're here. I sat down talking to somebody who had just a few days of sobriety. Now, I'm not an alcoholic. I was talking to somebody a few minutes ago about something they heard me say at a conference that I didn't drink well. I had people for that. From the very beginning, I had people for that. I married my beautiful wife. She drank more than enough for both of us. It was okay. We didn't bring down the average in the neighborhood. Certainly, we raised it quite a bit. But I love coming to AA. I love being a guest of AA. I've been a grateful guest of AA since before I started coming to Al-Anon. And what I realize is that I would listen to the AA speakers. I did with Candace last night and the other speakers that I'm privileged to get to hang around with from time to time. And I identify thoroughly with what you hear at an AA meeting about people who just feel like they didn't belong here, like they couldn't possibly have been, biologically related to this family, that everybody seemed to know intuitively how to do stuff and they could fit in and interact with their fellows, and that they were waiting for the mothership to send a pod to come pick them up and take them back where they belong, and they couldn't interact with you. My wife describes the fact that she couldn't be close to you or love you, and then they ingest beverage alcohol, and all of that changes. There's no way they can live life in the way that they describe from here, which is this blowing hole through the middle of them, right to the center of their soul, where the winds are screaming and you hear nothing else, and they put alcohol. And for the first time, a friend of mine in AA says, first time he ingested alcohol was the first time his shoulders dropped from his ears. It was the first time he ever exhaled all the way. The reason I love coming to AA is because I identify thoroughly with that description of life, that living life in secret, looking around to see how come everybody else seems to know what to do and I don't, knowing that I can't ever bridge that gap between me and you and have a physical connection, the guy who can't get off the wall at the dance. And on the day when I ingested beverage alcohol, which I anticipated for a long time because I saw the magic that alcohol did in my family for the people that are close to me, and I was greatly disappointed to find out that it did not fix that problem in me. Now, usually when I share that at a venue where there's mostly AAs, the gentleman I was talking to this morning says, you can see a ripple run through the room. What would you have done? As an alcoholic, if you had, for the first time, ingested alcohol and it hadn't done that magic that many of you described from the podiums of AA, do you think you would have survived? It didn't do that for me. I had to find something else. I had to find another way to fit in and another way to get by. And as I sat with this person this morning, recognizing, because I go to a lot of AA meetings, somebody who's terrified to pick up a drink and terrified not to. That my wife says that what alcohol did for her was it kept her alive in a world that was too hostile to survive in until she could get to AA, and that AA has kept her alive ever since. And the only frame of reference I have is that our Al-Anon literature says that we need to give understanding and encouragement to the alcoholic in our traditions. Understanding means I get to have an understanding of their disease. I can't have compassion without that. Also says in our literature that we need to learn all we can about alcoholism. And I've been a regular attendee at AA meetings for over 22 years. Every single week, I'm sure that I've been to more than 1,000 AA meetings to learn about a disease that I do not have from the people who do. And I was talking to Susan this morning and to Bob. We were talking about the microphone, and you don't want to touch this microphone. If you come up here, don't touch that little one. That's Bob's. He'll come and get you. That at our Saturday night AA meeting, I set up the mic. Now, today is Saturday. There's two things that I know are going to happen today back home, and two reasons I know that they will miss me at home. One of them is that at the Saturday night meeting, at which I am a non-member founder of an AA meeting. My beautiful wife and I founded the meeting. I typed the formats. I've done the sound system at that meeting ever since we started it. And I set that microphone so that they can't push it away or get it screwed up, and they can hear them back in the back of the meeting. And I know that tonight they will know I'm missing because the people in the back room will not hear the speaker because you can't train them to do this by themselves. And I set up the microphone. The other thing is that right now, this morning, my Saturday morning home group is meeting, and the only reason that they know I'm not there is because the chairs are not right. When I'm there, the chairs are right. And it's not that my spiritual presence creates a vacuum in the room like my head would like me to believe. It's just that the chairs aren't right. And I'm here because I'm not all there. That family that I grew up in, there was a lot of alcoholism. You know, when I'm sitting in a meeting and I hear an Al-Anon speaker, there's a couple things I want to hear. That there was an alcoholic somewhere in the woodpile. I'll tell you that I am the father of an alcoholic. I am the husband of an alcoholic. I'm the grandchild of several alcoholics. I am the nephew of a bunch of alcoholics, and I am the brother of we have a very fertile family. I'm the brother of a great many alcoholics. Now, not all of those people have identified themselves as alcoholics, and there's people who will stand up here and tell you that you can't call them that unless they call themselves that. Well, this is just my opinion. I disagree. I figure if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, if you come to a wedding or a big family function at my house, there's a lot of quacking going on. So they can call themselves whatever they want, but what it says in our literature is if you're affected by somebody else's drinking, they don't have to identify themselves as alcoholic, and in that regard, I certainly qualify. That home that I grew up in, there was a lot of drinking going on. My parents didn't have the decency to drink to help me to understand how I got so bent up when I came out in the world. I don't believe my parents were alcoholic. That confused me for a long time. A lot of people in Al-Anon, a lot of people in AA talk about coming from an alcoholic home. I believe I had an alcoholic home, and it was that without the presence of the chemical. That alcoholism and my grandparents deeply affected my parents. That the disease of alcoholism went through my house like a freight train, just like it did many of yours, without the presence of the chemical. I heard in an AA meeting early on that alcoholism can exist in the absence of the presence of the chemical alcohol. My wife is coming up on 24 years of sobriety. There hasn't been alcohol in our house for a very long time. We still have alcoholism in our house. I go to meetings because my wife is just wired a little bit different, and I want to learn how to be able to survive and interact and be a partner with her, but she doesn't think like other people. I was at a conference down in Georgia or North Florida or something last year, and she called me up on a Friday night, and she said, I just thought that if you ran out of things to say, I'd give you a little something extra. It's just, oh, do tell, what happened? She said, well, I set the house on fire again. I said, really? That would make 6. 2 of them when she was drinking and 4 in sobriety. Her nickname is Sparky, if you kind of get the idea. I said, would you care to share with me how that happened? And she said, well, I took the girls out, went to the county fair. We got some fast food on the way home, and I thought when we got home there was some food left over. I'd pop it in the oven, put it on warm. We'd have a snack for later, like you do with pizza. I said, oh, good. Now, about 2 years ago, I built her an atomic kitchen. It's thermonuclear. Everything in there is like you could weld stuff in her oven or microwave. There's all the best appliances. She said, I popped that thing in the oven. I went back out to unload the car. And I came back in, and there was smoke in the house down to about my chest. And there was flames leaping out of the front of the oven. And I said, so, you know, I have this, my sponsors pointed out to me, I have this annoying ability to ask really bad questions of the alcoholic. I said, so what did you do? She said, well, I opened the door. I reached in, I grabbed the flaming bags of food, and I ran over and I threw them in the sink. I said, go on. She says, and then I patted the fire out with my fingers. I says, oh, really? Are you hurt? Are you burnt? She says, well, just my fingertips. I said, did it occur to you to maybe turn on the water to put out the fire? And she said, well, no, then the French fries would have gotten soggy. I hung up the phone, I went to a meeting, is what I do. You know, my drug of choice is adrenaline. Have you figured that out yet? If you marry an alcoholic woman, they're an absolutely inexhaustible supply of adrenaline. We have that every day. And that family was pretty tore up. There was a lot of stuff going on. If there was a family function going on, there was always drinking. There was often violence. There was frequently the police. There was broken furniture and hurt feelings and lots of stuff going on. And when I looked around that family and saw what alcohol did for those people, what it did for my aunts and my uncles and my grandparents and stuff, I couldn't wait to drink alcohol. And as I've already shared with you, it just didn't work for me. I had to find another way to fit. Because I don't fit. I don't deserve to be in the same planet, breathing the same air with you. I've got to find some way to be okay. And what I became was that guy in the family that just fixes it for everybody else. The people that I hung with in school and my family or whatever, there is no 911 on anybody's speed dial. I'm 911. They don't call the authorities. They call me. I will fix it, cover it up, pick up the hot checks, make excuses at the employer. I'll take care of business and I'll fix them. And if I fix it for them and they think I'm okay, I'm okay. If I do for you and do enough for you and you think I'm okay, I'm all right. It's a terrific business model. Until one of you is not pleased. If you don't think I've done enough or sacrificed enough or paid enough or worked hard enough and you no longer think I'm okay, I'm not okay. At that point it becomes a terrible way to live your life. I'm the guy that got the phone calls in the middle of the night, which was frequently, and one of the ones that I talk about was a call I got from my stepmom who said that my brother had been in a fight at the bar. He picked a fight, or they picked a fight with 7 or 8 guys. It seemed to be his magic number. It was always 7 or 8 guys. I don't think he ever really understood his physical size. He's not really he's smaller than I am, but he was always numerically impaired. And they'd broken the windows out of his van and tried to drag his date out, and he'd driven out of the parking lot of the bar dragging a couple of them, and he'd gone home, dropped her off, got the shotgun, gone back to the bar, and who gets the phone call? I get, it's the bat signal on the cloud. Time to go. I get the call from my stepmom. She says, brother's been in a fight. He's gone to the bar with a shotgun. You need to go get him. And of course I do. This is what I do. This is how I'm okay in the world. This is how I get off the wall at the dance. This is how I deserve your love or attention or affection or your respect. I got out of bed. It took me 5 minutes to find him. I have tracking and stalking skills. It was the first place I checked. It was a little pizza place down the street. It's still there, this little mall. The parking lot where the events happened isn't anymore. It's all condos. But I've showed up in the parking lot, and here sits my baby brother at 2:30, almost 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's not a car or a person for miles. The bar is closed. They close at 2 in California. And he's got the shotgun propped up against the wind wing of his van, and he's waiting. And I pulled up and asked, remember the obvious question thing? I pulled up and I said, so what are you doing? He says, I'm waiting for him to come back. I checked my watch. It's 3 a.m. The bar doesn't open till 6. If they do come back, it won't be till then. They're probably all home sleeping it off. As I'll be having the shotgun now, and he gave me the shotgun. I cracked the breech and dropped the shells and the shotgun in the trunk, and my mission is accomplished. I can walk among you with my head high for another day. And I'm getting ready to go home, and he says, well, I said, so what are you going to do? He said, well, I'm going to go find him. Now, my family has family values. They taught us certain things, to rules to live by when you go out in the world. And apparently one of them was that when you get in a fight with 7 or 8 guys and they hand you your ass on a plate, the very next thing that occurs to you is to go find them and tangle again, right? That's what we do. I figured the odds of that were pretty slim. I sent him on his way, and I went on my way, and I was going out the driveway, and we had CB radios in all our cars, generations of truck drivers in my family, and my radio comes on, and it's him. He says, I found them. They're around the back. I was that close to getting away. I should have had that radio off, I expect, and I turned that little car around, a little 69 Mustang that I built myself that ran pretty good. And he'd gone that way when he left, so I went this way around the building, and we kind of converged around the backside, and there was about 5 acres of asphalt back there that's all condos now. They paved over the scene of the crime. As I come around the corner, sure enough, there's about 3 cars right in the middle of the parking lot. There's about 7 or 8 guys standing around sucking down a beer, 3 o'clock in the morning, minding their own business, having a beer. I see brother's headlights over there about a quarter mile away, and my radio comes on, and he says, I'm going in. If you are a newcomer in Al-Anon or you don't actually speak Al-Anon, I will translate that for you. That means that we're going in. Now, I'm not the baddest guy on the block. I'm not the best in the fight. I'm not the biggest, and I'm not the strongest, and I'm not the toughest. What I am is something that's far more dangerous. I'm afraid. I see brother's headlights get bright, and he's coming. If I don't go when he goes, what is he going to think of me? What is everybody else going to think of me when he goes and tells my dad and my other brothers and my family? So he's going in, we're going in. And I started going in there, and I'm trying to figure out, brother's too drunk to fish. And there's 8 guys, and I'm doing the math on my way in, trying to figure out how I'm going to handle my 7 of them. So I've got to come up with a plan, and my plan is that I'm going to get in there going pretty hard, and I'm going to grab the emergency brake on that little Mustang and bring it back in around. I'm going to slide in there sideways. I'm going to hit one of those cars, broadside, in the hopes that I could pin 2 or 3 of them between the chassis and give me a chance to get out of the car. One of the family values that I learned in my house was my daddy said the most critical time in any gang fight is that few seconds it takes you to get into or out of the automobile. You're very vulnerable at that point. And I'm trying to overcome that obstacle, and my solution to it is I'm going to crash him. I got going in there, I topped it out in second gear, reached down, and I mashed that emergency brake to the floor and started the back end around. And I'm fully committed to taking the action I've just described to you when my radio comes on one last time, and it says, I don't think that's them. Now, when I talk to my baby brother on the phone today, I say I love you when we hang up the phone. He says it back. It's something he's learned grudgingly in recovery, that we have affection in our family. I used to hug and tell my dad that I loved him after recovery. We didn't do that before, but I didn't really like him very much that time. And I gathered that car up, and I managed to go past there without hitting any of those guys. And I don't know exactly how I did that. I got it going straight, and I went past the front of one of the cars, and if there'd been another coat of paint on my door, I'd have got him on the way by. And I went past baby brother because I didn't really feel like talking to him very much, and I went out the driveway and I went home. Now, I shared that story. I've been sharing it for years at meetings, and there's another reason I'll get to in a second, because it has great, entertainment value. It gives me street cred in AA. He didn't drink and he was going to murder those people. I did that sober, by the way. I shared this at a meeting. That's one of the meetings I've been going to for over 22 years. I don't do change well. I've been to the meeting this morning and the one on my Monday night meeting I've been going to for over 22 years, and my men's meeting for 20, and it's only 20 years old. And I told that story at that Monday night meeting, and a young man walked up to me and he said, that night in the parking lot where you almost ran those guys down? I said, yeah. He says, I was there. Now, when you do the steps with your sponsor, and you put those names on your 8-step list, did you ever think they were all going to show up? I thought, oh my God, but he looked too young to be one of those guys. And he said, well, I wasn't one of those guys. He says, before your mom called you that night, she called my uncle. And my uncle grabbed me, I was with him, and we went over there, and we were sitting over in the far end of the parking lot with the lights off, and we saw the entire thing. And he had been just a little boy. He says, to this day, I can't imagine how you didn't kill somebody that night. He watched the whole thing. And this young man is the bravest man I've ever met in Al-Anon, because the very next thing he said was, will you sponsor me? If you're shopping for a sponsor and you're kind of kicking around the idea of who might qualify and who might be best, my advice to you is pick the craziest son of a bitch in the room, because they're always going to be too sick to leave. That's what he did that night. Get a really sick one. They got to stay here. Anyway, the reason I tell that story is something different, is that night when I got that call, I'd love to tell you I was 18 years old, young and dumb and stupid. I'd have certainly hurt or killed somebody that night and wound up in jail or in prison for what I was about to do, and I was fully committed to taking that action. But that's not the case. When I got that call, I had already been discharged from the United States Marine Corps, a 4-year Vietnam-era veteran. I didn't see combat, but I was in during Vietnam. I'd been promoted to sergeant because apparently drunken drill instructors and commanding officers really like having folks like me around because we make them look good. I did very well in the service. And that when I got out of that bed, there was a wife in that bed. And when I walked to the door, I walked past a crib where my daughter lay in a full coma from a drowning accident. She had drowned while I was away working, and that wife was working in the care of a babysitter in a 1.5-foot deep plastic pool in the backyard. and in a full and profound coma with tubes sticking out of every part of her body. We brought her home to do her care because they were going to put her in a state institution. And that wife said, there's no way we're doing that. We'll take her home and we'll take care of her. And I walked past the room where my son was sleeping. He was about 3 years old. There's some people in this room that have actually met him. They'll remember in just a minute. And I went out and got in that car to take an action that certainly would have taken me away from that family instantly. Would have taken me away because I believed that I had no other choice. That my obligation to the family, that idea that blood is thicker than water, the very inspirational story of like Father Flanagan and the boy saying, he ain't heavy, he's my brother, are all wonderful things until you convert them with the disease of alcohol to this sick thinking that translates to, he may be an axe murderer, but he's my brother mentality. That, I might whip the crap out of him 5 days a week, but if you lay a finger on any of us on the weekend, you fight us all mentality that was a function of the alcoholism in my home. The other reason I tell that story is that I'm a guy that the reason I went in there to take on those 8 guys isn't because I'm tough, isn't because I'm bad, isn't because I'm scary, it isn't because I expected to win. It's because I'm terrified. I'm afraid of getting hurt. I'm afraid of being in a fight. I'm afraid of being outnumbered. I'm afraid of being maimed or killed. But there's one thing that scares me more than anything else. More than anything else. The fear that you will know I'm afraid. I went into that situation where I could have lost my life because the fear of being discovered as a coward is far greater than the fear of dying. That's the scariest thing on the planet. I'm a guy who, if you're in the bar and they start breaking the tops off the beer bottles and fixing to get busy, you want a scary, unpredictable, crazy bastard like me watching your back. But what I was unable to do, and the biggest guilt and shame I've ever had in my life, the thing I couldn't show up for was that child in that crib. I would stand in that room looking at her with the breathing monitor and the heart monitor and a tube in her neck and a tube in her stomach, requiring 24-hour-a-day constant care, and I couldn't stay in the room and I couldn't help. For a year that daughter lay in a coma, I was an absent father. I made sure that I was gone. I stayed at work, I stayed away. I couldn't go there. I brought that to you. I brought that to this program where we do inventory and we give up our darkest secrets and our biggest shame. And I could see how that worked for you in AA when you did that with your sponsor. I could see how that worked for you in Al-Anon. I couldn't see how you could fix that. That was just always going to be here. It was a rock I was always going to carry, and I came here anyway. I will tell you in retrospect that I was wrong, that the process of the steps and the inventory with a sponsor who understood the principle behind the steps and the fact that I had recovery and sobriety in my home and a wife who brought the 12 traditions into our home long before the steps had any effect in our home. The 12 traditions of AA began to have an effect on our house and how it ran. That I was wrong and that we did do the work to deal with that problem. That I got clean of that. I did the best work I could do. I went to the cemetery 12 years after that daughter died to make my amends. Taking actions I wasn't sure would work, didn't understand them, and I did them anyway. I went up there 2 or 3 times a week. I rode my bicycle up there and sat graveside and just went through the process of experiencing the grief that I'd been too afraid to do. She died. I remember I shared this at a meeting this week. I don't know where it came from, but I remember standing at the foot of her bed when they walked me in to find that she had passed away, and the shock of realizing that my 2-year-old daughter had died. And this thought went through the back of my head that said, I wonder how I'm supposed to feel. I wonder what I'm supposed to feel like. I just couldn't feel anything. That the idea of having feelings, standing at the foot of her bed when she was still alive, that those feelings would get up here and get away was the most terrifying thing I could imagine, and I couldn't process it. And I didn't just shut that down. I hit the brain breaker on anything you ever feel. Relationship to another human being, love, any emotion. I killed the main breaker. It just went away. And it had been gone a long time by the time I had that experience. That I got to do that 12 years later, and I got to experience all of those feelings. I spent the first couple of years in my recovery crying and blowing snot bubbles. Man, I'd be watching TV, and the AT&T commercial would come on, and they'd reach out and touch somebody, and they'd lose me. I'm like, they got away from me. I said, this is supposed to be good news? Like anything else in recovery, it's about balance. I was going to wheelie that over backwards for a while. I completely lost all control of the emotions, and they frightened me. But I wasn't afraid enough not to have them, and eventually I found a balance with that. I talk about certain things when I do this, but I don't always know where I'm going or what I'm going to talk about. It's just whatever is current today. That It was talked about yesterday when Keith did the workshop about assets and defects, that what I found as a process of doing an inventory with that sponsor is that virtually every defective character I had was an asset. That it was overused, misused, neglected, or abused. That the fact that I care about you is an asset. The fact that I want to be liked by you and socially accepted is an asset. The fact that I care about my wife and her health and her recovery is an asset. The minute I use that as an excuse to get in there and try and fix it for you or control what you think or change the way you think about me, the asset becomes a defect. The process of the steps for me was about taking all of those properties and returning to right size in my life. That sense of responsibility that told me that if I showed any weakness, at the moment my daughter died and my family was all amassed at the hospital, that if I showed even the faintest crack in my facade, that I'd lose them all. That they would go out of control, it would get away. I couldn't show them that. That was about having those defects where those assets had clearly turned to defects. I was responsible for everybody and what they felt and their pain. And it's an asset for me to feel your pain. When I sat across from that person I was talking about this morning, and I could feel the pain. I'm not an alcoholic, but I knew the pain and I knew the fear. That's an asset. It's a connection to another human being. For me to think that gives me permission or the ability to go in there and fix it is something entirely different. Then it becomes a defect. I never went back to that house. I went out in the world and I did a lot of things I'm not proud of. I met my beautiful wife, Leslie, otherwise a.k.a. Sparky. I was working on a movie in Arizona, and I was married, but I wasn't going home. And, as an alcoholic woman, she kind of liked hanging around with guys, but she didn't want any strings attached. And I was hopelessly attractive to her because of two things. I was married and talking nice about that wife at home. And I was dating her best friend while I was in this little town in Arizona, and that was like catnip for the alcoholic. She had to have me. She put the moves on me on the dance floor. I was on a date with her friend. She was trying to seduce me right there in this little bar we were at in Page, Arizona. And I said, I'm with somebody. She said, oh, I know. That's why I like you. I like to recognize and reward initiative like that, so I tracked down her unlisted number, and I called her, and we started dating, and we changed locations. I went down to Havasu, Arizona, still working on this movie, and she followed me down there and stayed for a week or two. And then her dad got sick, and I put her on a plane to go home to Nebraska to see her father, who was very ill at the time. And when I drove her to the airport and put her on the plane, I went to another gate and picked up my wife, who was coming in to visit from California. Why waste 2 trips to the airport? Oh, it gets so much better. This is the madness that I think makes perfect sense to me. And when that movie wrapped up, I went back to California, and Leslie was a Nebraska girl doing a series of geographics heading generally in the westerly direction. And she wound up in California and called me up for a date, and I went to pick her up. And my wife was out of town visiting family up in Central California, and I went to go find Leslie, and I couldn't find her. She kept giving me directions that had me going straight at a T intersection where there was no road, and I could go back to a phone booth, that's how long ago this was, and call her up and tell her I couldn't find her. I did this 2 or 3 times, and finally I'm doubling back across the freeway. It's the 14 freeway up in Palmdale, Lancaster area, and I come across this terrible wreck in the intersection. It wasn't there. I just drove through that intersection about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, and there's a bad wreck, head-on collision. 2 cars, a little Honda Prelude is buried in the front of this full-size Oldsmobile, and it's crushed up like it's ready for recycling. There's already police there, fire department, ambulance. They got the jaws of life. There's a lot of stuff going on. They're working hard to get this blonde woman out of this little Honda car because she is not breathing. And as I come on the wreck, I overhear the officers. They finally get the door open and they get her out of there. And I hear the officer say, we don't know who she is. She has no ID. She has no purse. She's got Nebraska plates. We have no idea who she is. I think I told them a name and told them who she was. And it was Leslie. And they put her in an ambulance. And I followed that ambulance, red lights and sirens, across the valley to this little hospital in the middle of nowhere. And they rolled her in. And I get out and I go inside. And I'm sitting next to her gurney. And they're waiting for her to come in and treat her. And she stops breathing. So far, our date sucks. I run out in the hall and I call a nurse and I tell them she's not breathing. And they call the code and they turn on these blue flashing lights over all the doors. And I call them code blue, room 5. And people come running down the hall with crash carts and IVs and equipment. And they run in there and they get her heart started again. And something happened that I wasn't to understand for a very long time until I began coming to AA, until I began to hear my wife talk about her disease of alcoholism in AA, is that when they got her heart started, she opened her eyes and she rolled her head over on the gurney and looked right at me and she said, "Let me go." Can you imagine that? I did not have the tools or the understanding to have any. For me, it was like she hit her head on the steering wheel and on the windshield. She blew the window out with her face. She's delirious. She doesn't know what she's talking about. And what she will tell you, if you have the privilege of hearing her speak from a mic like this, is that her disease had taken her to such places that dying looked preferable to paying the price again. Another wreck, another trip to jail, another drunk problem, another police involved. She was sure the police were waiting out in the lobby to take her away, and dying looked better to her. In her story, she says that she was walking into the great white light, and God said, "You got to go back," and she argued with him. And when she opened her eyes and saw me, it wasn't good news. That was to become a continuing theme in our relationship. They didn't treat any of her injuries. It was not a big hospital. It wasn't a trauma center. It was just a little emergency ward, and they put a neck brace on her and loaded her in my car. Said, "She's got to go." And the nurse, I remember the nurse helping her into the car. She can't move. She can't even lift her wrist off of the bed. She's really badly hurt, broken bones, crushed windpipe. She's died twice. And the nurse says, "I hope you live near a hospital because she's not doing very well." And I said, "Thanks for sharing that." So now what do we do, right? I never found where she was living. She has no idea where it is now or where she is, so that's not even on the cards. We're discussing what options we got for what we're going to do with her, and she says, she whispers through her crushed windpipe, she says, "Well, maybe you can take me to a hotel." And I really thought about that for about 8 seconds. I knew already exactly what was going to happen. I was going to take her to the hotel, and then I was going to be checking the papers every day for a Jane Doe they found dead in a hotel room. She was going to go there and wait to die. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Her hand was laying on the seat between us. I reached over, put my hand on top of hers, and I said, "Is this okay, honey? I got a better idea. I'll just take you home." Did y'all need to think about that for a minute, or did you forget I got a wife and a family at home? Yeah, some mathematical geniuses, I can see. I went to a payphone again. I called that wife up. I told her a story. A friend of mine come to town, been in a bad wreck, and she had no place to go. I was bringing her home. My wife met us in the driveway, and she grabbed Leslie's ankles, and I grabbed her armpits, and we carried her in. Leslie will tell you, if you get to talk to her, that as we were coming through the door, I dropped her. Now, I don't recall that, but it might be true. I could have been a little nervous bringing the girlfriend home to meet the wife and kids for the first time. We put her in a bed. We took shifts looking at her, watching her around the clock. We were sure she was going to die in a minute. She was really in bad shape. It really kind of changed the nature of the house. She started to get better. I made her a wheelchair so we could wheel her around, and it set up 6 months of some very interesting living, where my wife and my girlfriend are becoming friends. My wife is confiding in my girlfriend that there may be some problems in our relationship. And my girlfriend is giving my wife little helpful pointers on how to spice up the relationship. And I'm trying to get my girlfriend to mind her own business. But it's not unmanageable yet. She's off alcohol for a couple of weeks, doing some pretty heavy pain medication, and one night we're having wine at the table, and she insists on having some, and I argue with her. You can't drink wine. Look, it says on the label, you may not consume alcoholic beverages with this. I'm an Al-Anon. I'm a label reader. We read the labels. We follow directions. My girlfriend had such an embarrassing tantrum in front of my wife and family. We slid a bottle over to her, and she was so well behaved, we all noticed, so we made sure she had her own bottle every night from then on. It was the end of a very brief period of sort of sobriety, at least freedom from alcohol, and she began drinking again. So now we're doing everything together. Leslie can't get out of bed. She can't lift her wrist off the bed. We do everything. We put her in a chair, take her in the bathroom, drop her drawers, put her on the toilet, stand her up, put her back in the chair. We all shower together. I hold her up. My wife washes that side. We spin her around, wash the other side. We put her back in the chair. We're one big happy family. And it's not unmanageable yet. Did I mention I was sober when we did this? She started to get a little bit better, and she's hobbling around, got her on crutches now. We got her into a doctor's office. They started setting her bones. She had a broken leg and some other stuff going on. And that wife decided that Leslie needed to start seeing some of our single male friends and started calling them up, setting up double dates. So we would go out to a restaurant, nice place, tablecloth, maitre d', little wine, little dinner, some music maybe. And at some point during the dinner, somebody has kicked off their shoe and has their bare naked foot up the pant leg of my slacks, massaging my calf. And my highest ambition and hope in life is that it's not the other guy, because I have no idea who's doing it. Remember, girlfriend's giving wife some helpful pointers. If you ever find yourself in that position, what you do is you take a drink of wine, you smile, and you wink at everybody. You go, experience, strength, and hope. Stories like that are the things that really give me street cred in AA, because invariably an AA newcomer will come up to me after the meeting and go, tell me how you did that one. I use my powers for good, never evil. Leslie got a job offer in Texas, another in California. We decided Texas was a good place to go, and she went off to Texas. We'd gotten her a car. She'd gotten better, and she went to Texas. And I said about dissolving a marriage I hadn't shown up for in a long time. And Leslie got in trouble with her drinking down there and called me and asked if she could come home. And I drove to Houston, Texas, and picked her up and drove her home to live happily ever after. Yeehaw. I got to be with her for the last year of her drinking. My wife, Leslie, will tell you that up until that point, she was a bar drinker and a blackout drinker. She went to the bar virtually every night. She seldom came home. She was too drunk to know who she was or where she was or who she was with. When she moved in with me, for some reason, she knew that would be a deal breaker, and for some reason, she didn't want to violate that, so she moved her drinking into our kitchen. And I would come home and have a glass of wine with her, or have a cocktail with her, and after one or two glasses of wine, she was just drunker than $50, and I thought she was just a cheap date. And what it was she was drinking all day the way she needed to drink, and when I would come home, she'd suck it up for a while. And then if I saw her consume some beverage alcohol, then she could relax and be as drunk as she was. And many, many nights I carried her, sleeping to bed. She was passed out, blacked out, and unconscious. It took me a while to figure out, and it was long into recovery, that when in the morning we would wake up, she would wake up and her eyesight was very poor, and she would wake up and she would kind of slip over to my side of the bed and she would peer around the hair and look at my face and then go, whew. Me, I just thought she's glad to see me. She was just glad that it was me under the hair because she didn't have any idea what happened the night before. Blackout drinking. If you did not have a blackout alcoholic in your life, you missed the boat. That was the best. You got a blackout drinker, anything that goes wrong in your life, it's their fault. What are they going to do? Tell you it isn't? They don't remember, right? You wake up spring-loaded in the pissed-off position like I do, she's sorry. If she's sorry, you can get anything you want. You can get the home cooking, you can get the checkbook, you can get all the sex you want, whenever you want. You get, Lord help us all, the last thing I gave up in recovery, the TV clicker. Right? You get it all. She sobered up and screwed up all of that. I'm going to tell you, as I stand here today, if she was still drinking, I wouldn't be here. I was always ahead on points when she drank. I got anything I want. I'm the king of the house. I got the moral high ground every day. I got total control. My wife and I talked about what alcohol did for her and what it didn't do for me, and I explained to her one day, I says, the reason I didn't drink alcohol and I don't drink alcohol is because when I consume alcohol, I lose control. It's the most valuable commodity I have. And she looked at me like the RCA Victor dog used to look at the phonograph, and she says, what you don't understand is that when I drank alcohol, I gained control. That alcohol gave her the control. So the last year and a half of her drinking, I have no idea what's going on. She finally confides to me. We were up here. We were in Seattle, and I was doing a movie, and she got drunk. We were having a wrap party at a hotel in Seattle. It's been a long time ago now. And she staggered very drunk over to the director's table and leaned over him to tell him how to direct his movie and spilled his wine in his lap. I thought it was a bad career move for me, so I grounded her. Do you ever ground your spouse? I grounded her. I locked her in the room. She wasn't allowed to come out. And I'd come home every night and she was drunk. She'll tell you now that she used to get out and she'd hike way up the hill. She couldn't go to a liquor store near the hotel because somebody might see her. She hiked way up the hill to get her booze every day and came back down. So that set up 6 months of me trying to help her stop drinking. Where she'd come home from the restaurant where she worked and I'd give her the kiss sniff test. You ever do that? You go, have you all been drinking? Of course, she would deny it. No, I was eating the sols. I go, okay. What do I know? I don't know anything. I'm going to tell you, this is something that you guys taught me that I learned in Al-Anon, is that when she would come home and I would ask her, really out of a legitimate concern for her health and for her sobriety, though she didn't have any, and for our relationship and our finances, her job, for everything, I would say something as seemingly innocuous as, have you been drinking? Right? Seems like an honest question when you back it up with those motives. Here's what my wife heard. This is what went through my wife's head. She says, well, screw you, you nosy bastard. Just for that, I'm going to drink. Right? Well, what just happened when that transpired? I'll tell you what happened. My wife's an alcoholic. In her disease, she was going to drink either way. By asking the question, I relieved her of any responsibility for the choice to pick up the drink. Now, we talk a lot about the 3 C's in Al-Anon. Didn't cause it, can't control it, and can't cure it. And yet, when you're working with a sponsee and they want to go get in her stuff and find her bottles, you tell them not to do it because it'll contribute to the problem. How do we have power or not have power? There's another C, it's cosign. I can cosign a drink that she's going to take, and she doesn't have to be responsible for the choice. I'll tell you how powerful it is. She can already be drunk. And when I asked that question, through her head went, well, if you had a nosy bastard like you for a spouse, you would drink too. I just co-signed a drink she'd already taken. That's how we get in there and how we make things worse in the disease of alcoholism. She screwed things up and got sober. What can I tell you? It's a sad, sad thing. It was going just fine, and then one day she checked herself into a rehab. I don't know what was going on with that. I was working on the road. I came home. I was throwing her out again. She embarrassed me with my family. We didn't have any friends left. You know, with the disease, people just start falling off the edges because they really don't like her when she's drinking, and she's not that nice when she drinks. They don't like me when I'm around her when she's drinking, so they just started falling off the edges. There's not much left, and I was going to throw her out, and I came home, and she came in and she stood in front of the couch. I was sitting on the couch. We hadn't had the conversation yet, and she was crying because I'd had a glass of wine that she'd poured for me, and it freaked her out, and she dropped it and ran out of the house crying. I didn't even look up. It's the madness of alcoholism. It's just one more day at our house. And she walked back in. I think she left the door open, walked back in, stood in front of me at the couch, and she said, I need to tell you that I know you told me that if I went and got any help outside that I'd have to leave. Apparently I said that to her. The arrogance of my disease is that when I was helping her trying to get sober, and she said, I don't think I can do this by myself, what I said to her was, if you go anywhere else, you're out of here. That's the arrogance that I came to you with. The kind of arrogance, and I don't know a better way to describe it than this. This is the arrogance I brought to you, is I'm a guy who believed that God killed my child to let me know what a piece of crap I am. God would go out of his way to send me a candygram in the form of the death of an innocent child to communicate with me is a description of an ego that is beyond any other description. And when she said that to me in the living room, I thought, okay, we'll see. She's back on probation. She was always on probation. She's going to these meetings down there. They took me down there for wives' night. I'm the only guy. Me and the other wives, we went in there to get a little talk. And I remember arguing with the counselor over whether alcoholism was a disease. Did you ever do that? You know, she gets in trouble, she drinks, she has a hangover, she loses her job. Why don't you just stop? I would stop. She would come home and fix me a cocktail at night, and in the morning I'd have a little low-grade headache, kind of almost a hangover. And after a few days of that, I'd say, we need to stop. Because I go, here's the consequence, here's the action. Is this worth the benefit I get from that? Is this thing that I have in me that is broken in every alcoholic I've ever met? That you hear in AA, they tell the alcoholic, say, okay, here's your choices. You can come to these lame old meetings and follow a few spiritual principles and talk to some people, or you can die in the gutter of your alcoholism, a terrible death. And what does the alcoholic say? They say, well, how terrible? Right? Well, what's your decision going to be? I'm thinking, because this is broken in the alcoholic. I assume this works in everybody because it works in me. It doesn't work in her. She's going to these meetings. I went in there. She's going to AA. She's got a sponsor. The meanest woman in AA is her sponsor, a woman who would walk into a room like this. I was talking to Keith earlier about the buzz you hear at a place where there's good recovery, and there'd be a buzz going on in the room, and she would walk in the door and a hush would roll over the room because they're all afraid of her. She was scary sober. And I wasn't afraid of her. I loved that woman because she was mean to my wife. I would call her up and give her some pointers. I know you guys are working the steps and you've gone past 3, but this is what's going on in our house. I think you might need to revisit that one. She'd go, oh, thank you, Jack, for sharing. Disinfect the phone, you know. So I was not a vision for you. My wife is sober today in spite of my efforts to help her. After a year, she invited me to go to AA with her. She said, I went to her first sobriety birthday. I actually gave her a cake, which I thought I had earned the right to do because I'd helped her get sober. Arrogance again, right? That's my problem. She says that people in AA think you're my imaginary friend. I think I need to be seen with you at meetings. And I thought, that, for some reason that scared me, that people in AA might think that she was not right. So I went with her to these AA speaker meetings every Saturday night up in Simi Valley, California. My friend Frank S. was the founder of that meeting, some people I still kind of keep in touch with today. And I'm going as a non-member guest. I'm not an Al-Anon. I'm just there as a guest. I'm listening to speakers. And the things that those people shared in those meetings changed my life. Without a doubt, changed my life. I'm looking around the room, and I'm going there for a while. I'm seeing people coming back. right? Coming back with newcomer again, newcomer again, newcomer again. We go to our meeting every Saturday night. You know, the women that my wife and her girls work with when they're new, they finally give up and they come sit in the front row where the recovery is, and they're newcomers again, newcomers again. I'm sitting in that meeting, I'm going, loser, 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 loser. My wife's sober. She got a year. Loser, loser. Guy gets up at the podium and introduces himself. He says his name, I'm an alcoholic. And he says, do you know who wants to be sober more than anybody else in this room? And nobody answered him, of course. And he says, those people who just put their hand up as newcomers again want it more than any of you. Don't you ever forget it. Took the judgment off. Another guy said something that I really believe is the basis of my recovery and the way I live my life today. He said that, I got a wife who's sober. The idea of her going back to drinking seems absurd to me. It was so bad in the drinking. From my perspective, it's so good in recovery. It's beginning to get good in the home because of the traditions, I might add. She's starting to live a pretty good life. The idea that she could ever return to drink is a completely foreign idea to me. The guy got up at the podium and he says, I'm an alcoholic. He says, right here is a stack of solutions for my problem. He says, when I get into trouble, I'm going to reach over and grab something off that stack. And I'll tell you what's on there. Right on the top is being right here at this microphone talking to you. Solution to my problem, being out of self, thinking about somebody else, working with others. That's the top one. He's right underneath that is going to meetings, sponsoring people, being of service, reading the literature, studying the literature. Those are the solutions to my problem. He says, this is a big stack. Is way down in there is the solution is going to be one of them is picking up a drink. Never occurred to me that that was in his stack of solutions. He says, on the day that I get up and I go, you know, I'm going to skip the meeting tonight because the game's on. And I'm sorry I can't sponsor you, and I'm doing too many guys, and I wouldn't give you the quality time, and we take that off. And you know, maybe I skip a few more meetings, and maybe I don't take any commitments. I give the commitments can go to the new people. He says, there will come a day for me when I'm in trouble, and I reach over and grab what's on the top of that stack, and what's on top of that stack is picking up a drink. It never occurred to me that that was still a viable solution to the problem. That for me in that stack of solutions is the same stuff. I'm right here right now with you instead of with my family where I would really rather be. I'm honored to come and do this, but this is 2 days of flying and 1 day of talking. That's a pretty concentrated deal to be away from my wife who's very ill and my children who are special needs and the load that puts on her for me to be here. I'd really much rather be home. But that's on the top of that stack. When I answer the phone, I come and see you. I sponsor a lot of people. I go to meetings. I don't ever leave. Those are things on my stack of solutions. Down in there is cheating on my wife. She doesn't love me enough or love me the right way. Down in there is doing violence to you. If you don't operate your motor vehicle properly in my presence on the freeway, that's down in the stack. Down in there is stealing from my employer because they don't really respect me enough and they don't treat me and pay me well enough. Those are solutions to my problem. And on the day that I start peeling those things off the top because I'm too busy or I've come too far or I know too much, one day I reach to that stack and one of those other things is going to come up. This is why I'm here talking to you. A lot of stuff has happened since those early days. I've been around here a long time. I got involved in service. My first sponsor was a woman. It was what was available to me. I started going to meetings when she was a year and a half sober. I snuck out to meetings. I didn't want her and her sponsor to know I was going. And I went to that meeting I was talking about this morning, and I picked it out of the directory because I'm a long-distance bicycle rider. I still ride 4,000 miles a year, and I was going to ride up there, take in a meeting, and then finish my ride, and I would have a Saturday with a ride and a meeting. And there's a problem, though. See, I don't want to be new. I don't want you to notice I'm in the room. I just want to hide. I want to come in and get this. I'm hurting. I want to get the secret handshake and get out, but I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to pray with you. That was horrifying. So I'm going to ride up there in my bicycle suit to be the anonymous newcomer guy in a room with 60 women wearing glow-in-the-dark, heat-shrink-to-fit, spandex bicycle suit to be the anonymous guy in the Al-Anon meeting. So I'd get there early, and I'd bring a backpack full of my street clothes, and I'd change it. There's a little patio with a lovely little garden off the side, and I changed it into my street clothes, and I was the first one there. And when you got there, I was through the door, and I'm setting up the chairs. I'm still doing that, remember? I'm setting the literature. I'm helping with the coffee. I'm doing the stuff. I'm busy, busy, busy. I'm too busy to talk to you. How are you? I'm fine. That's F-I-N-E. Ask your sponsor what that means. The last of you would leave. I'd clean the floor, stack all the chairs, get all my stuff ready to go. When the last one's gone, I'd slip out in that little garden. I'd change my clothes, get on my bike, and finish my ride. Now, it's a lovely story. We're still meeting in the same church. We're in a little different room. But if you go down there, you will find out what I know now is that there's a big bay window from the meeting room that leads out into the garden. And it has a one-way glass. And if you were early for the meeting, you apparently got the entire show. I was changing my clothes in the bushes at an Al-Anon meeting. Come on, it doesn't, I'm here because I'm not all there, remember? So I'm going to that meeting a couple of months. I realize that's my meeting. I earned that chair in my meeting by my behavior and my choices, and it was mine to take. Whether you're an AA or an Al-Anon, there's a chair there with your name on it, and they'll save it for you if you don't come back. And I've had to fight for that chair many times. I don't fight for my meeting because it gets my ego involved in the idea that I think I know how they should run it, especially now that I've got some time. But I earned that chair, and it was mine. And I showed up as who I am. I'm a guy in Al-Anon who rides a bicycle. I showed up in spandex. And I walked in, and not too many of them got to talk to me. I was kind of keeping my distance. And my friend Patty, who I tell this story with her permission, walked up, and she patted me on my spandex butt, and she said, "You keep coming back, honey." She still sits with me on Saturday. We still laugh about that stuff. And I got that woman sponsor. It upset my wife. She's old school AA, men with men, women with women. I didn't have any choices. I needed help. I needed somebody that knew the steps and knew how to do them, and she did. And it created a problem in our home where I'd come home, she said, "You call your sponsor? Have you done your sexual inventory yet?" And we had to create a wall between our recovery, which was the best thing that ever happened. You see, we never talked about it with each other because it wasn't safe. I had to get out of her recovery and what she was doing and when she was calling and how far along she was. She had to get out of mine. It was the best thing we ever did. We found out and believe to this day that we're not on the same journey and we're not in a race. That we're on parallel paths heading more or less generally that direction where recovery is, and that we have nothing to do with each other. One of the most important things I learned around here was about transparency. I was 100% transparent with that sponsor. That woman sponsor got it all. When we sat down to do the inventory, the stuff with the daughter, the infidelities, all the stuff, got it all. I am 100% transparent with my sponsor. I do not require nor do I desire transparency from my wife. She has people for that. There came a day when I came home and I knew she'd been doing an inventory again. She'd gotten a new sponsor and she said, "We're doing it again." And she was writing days and days, writing on this yellow pad. And my drug of choice is information, right? If I can just get enough information, I'll get the power back. If I just, when she was drinking, if I knew where it was, if I knew where she hid it, I knew when she was drinking, if I knew what she was trying to hide from me, it would give me the power to fix it. And it's a lie. It's a lie that my disease tells me. And one day I walked in the kitchen, that yellow pad was on my side of the breakfast counter, face up. We call that an Al-Anon loophole. On that day, picking up that thing and reading it was somewhere down the stack of solutions to my problem for whatever reason. I was spiritually evolved enough that I didn't pick it up and read it. I turned it over and I slid it across the table. And to this day, I don't know what was in it, and I have no desire to know. And I sponsor a lot of people, and I've had them call me when they accidentally found her inventory, when they were relentlessly searching the house for it. And then read it and became in receipt of a lot of information that they had no idea and no power to deal with. I've never experienced a more damaged and hurt human being in my life than the people who got what they wanted more than anything else, which was the information about that stuff. And now what do you do with it? And there's a common phrase we use. It's called self-inflicted gunshot wound. This is a pain that we cause ourselves, right? Got busy in the program. That sponsor assured me I was going to be sponsoring guys because I'm the only guy there. There's nothing creating testosterone in Al-Anon for 100 miles in here, as I can tell. I'm it. And she said, if you're in the chair every week, they're going to come, and they're going to stay. They're going to ask you to sponsor them. You need to get busy. And I did. I started working the steps. I began to talk to the newcomers, that stuff that Keith talked about, that, hanging around the meeting and shoveling off the jobs to the younger people who need it more than we do is a bunch of crap. I take commitments and I do commitments and I sponsor people to save my life and the lives of the people around me who would die if I got homicidal again, And I started amassing all these guys, and they do like me. They'd show up early for the meetings and set up the chairs. You come to any of my meetings today, and it'll look like a men's stag 45 minutes before the meeting because all them sick guys show up. Only the sick ones come early. And we set up the chairs, and then we greet the newcomers. You see a newcomer woman coming across a lot of times, spread out. We're scaring the newcomer girls because those meetings are now 1/3 to 1/2 guys, those same ones that I went to. My men's meeting met 2 nights ago. I wasn't there because I had to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to fly here to meet you guys yesterday. But I guarantee you there was between 120 and 135 guys at a men's Stag Al-Anon meeting in La Cañada, California. It's one of the most remarkable meetings I've ever been to. We got child care upstairs. We got single fathers that need to go to a meeting. We provide child care. Open meeting once a month. If you come to Southern California, the first Thursday of the month we have an open speaker meeting. We celebrate Al-Anon anniversaries. We have a speaker, men and women, and we have 250 to 300 people at a speaker meeting. It's a tremendous meeting. My last 2 sponsors I've met in that place. I'm kind of running out of time because I've gotten off on a couple of sidebars, but I'll tell you some stuff that's going on now. When I walked past that bedroom where my son lay, by the time he got to be 16, we'd been in recovery for a year or two. We'd made our best amends to him, and he had some work to do, apparently. And he became violent with my wife, and she called me. I was working in Texas and told me that he'd become violent with her, and he stole some stuff and asked what to do. And I said, "That's easy, honey. Call old man Stokes to change the locks on the house." My son at 16 went on the street. It was a very hard decision to make. We had made amends to him. He'd seen recovery, but it wasn't for him. He had a story to work on. He went on a tear. 7 states wants and warrants he had. Bail bondsmen liked to have a chat with him. He wound up in Oregon, Central Oregon, where he is to this day. And we weren't sure what his problem was. We hadn't seen him drink or drug. He'd been gone too long for that. And because of the program and because of the amends process, we began to talk on the phone. And he would call me frequently, sometimes several times a week, and he'd call me late at night when the crap was hitting the fan, and she's throwing him out, she's throwing his clothes out, and he'd tell me all the crimes that she's done. His girlfriend at the time, they were engaged, and he would be drunk on the phone. And I never brought it up. I never pointed it out. Everything in me is telling him, tell him. We see the problem. There's problem, solution, tell him, connect the two. Because of you guys, I didn't do it. You guys beat into me early on that the only one on the planet that can't help him is me. 1,000 AA meetings, I'll read and study the big book. I know it better than most people. I study it with the people I sponsor, not at Al-Anon meetings. It doesn't belong there. I'm well versed in it. I understand the problem. Because he's too close to me, I can't help him. I can't help my brothers and sisters. There came a day where he called me up and she had run off. She got drunk and went off and had a threesome with his best buddy and all the ugly stuff that alcoholism brings around. And he says, I need some help. Can you help me? And I said, no, I can't. But because I do service in Al-Anon, because I travel around the country and I know people everywhere, I knew somebody who said, I'll help him. If he ever wants help, give him my number. And I gave him the number for a guy that some of you folks know out on the coast of Oregon. And he hooked him up, got him busy in AA, got him commitments. He got sober. He spent 3 years having a blast in AA. We started going to conferences together. I'm taking him with us. You know, we go to Crested Butte and we bring him along. And his sponsor gave him he had a year and a half. His sponsor gave him back his dating card. You know, when they got a year and they can go date and see women and have relationships. I went, oh, he's gone half the night. And I'm going, oh man, this could be ugly. And minding my own business. He got in a relationship with a woman who I think has the problem. Maybe it's drugs or alcohol. And she didn't like him going to meetings. And they got married and he quit going. And he went back to drinking. And there's a piece of my ego that said, little guy in the back of my head, the committee's still there, by the way. He said, he chose drinking over his relationship with you. Okay. I know that's not true. My first call is to my sponsor, tell my sponsor, and he helps me to understand that that's the nature of my ego and my disease, to believe that he's chosen drink over me. He's chosen drink because alcoholism is making his choices. Has nothing to do with me. Year and a half ago, 19 months ago now, on Halloween morning, he called me at 1:30 in the morning from jail. He'd gotten a job. He was off in Nebraska, some little podunk town in the middle of nowhere with a real small population, and he'd gone out drinking a little beer, got a little knife fight, and they locked him up on 2 felony counts, and he was in jail. He called me and asked me if I'd bail him out, and I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. Now, I'll tell you the truth is that financially I couldn't have done it. We've had some tough times in the movie business. It's been very difficult. Sometimes are good, sometimes are not. It was tight. But even if I could have, I understood enough to tell him that I couldn't do it and not tell him why. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he kept calling me, and he said, well, maybe they're looking at some jail time. He said, well, maybe they'll give me treatment instead of jail. I said, well, we'd had this conversation when he quit going to AA. I said, well, that begs the question, are you in there because of alcoholism or because of a bad break? He says, oh, bad break for sure. Just want to bang the phone on the desk a few times. There's a problem with the phone, man. Kept it zipped. He didn't ask the question. All right. 2 weeks later goes by. They haven't backed his charges off. He's looking at pretty serious stuff. He calls. He says, Dad, I realize I'm in here because I'm an alcoholic. and I need some help, but there's no AA in this town. I checked. There was 22 NA meetings. It's like a meth capital of the world or something. One AA meeting with no contacts. He couldn't find anybody. He said, I can't find anybody in AA. And I said, let me see what I can do. I called a friend of mine back in Nebraska who probably sponsored half the state. He was 800 miles away in Omaha, and I asked him if he knew anybody over there. And the next day, a guy who was either the delegate or the outgoing delegate for AA in Nebraska called me up. He said, what's up? He said, my son's in jail and needs to make some calls to people. You can't call a cell phone from jail. They won't let the call go through. When you do take the call on a landline, it's expensive. I need somebody in AA who's willing to take my son's call. He said, here's my number. I'll take his call. I said, do you know anybody in northwest Nebraska? He said, I don't know. I'll get back to you. He never got back to me. The next day, two members of AA with big books showed up at the jail. Did what Keith was talking about. They took a meeting inside. They took a meeting to him in there every week till he got out. He got out, he called me. I said, even if you don't stay sober, you're responsible for founding a meeting in that jail now. Be your meeting. They reduced his charges. He got out. That was his sobriety date. He got sober that day. He's got 19 months. I talked to him yesterday. He's on fire with AA. He's sponsoring people. He called me a while back. He says, I'm sponsoring 4 guys, and 2 of them are still drinking. I said, boy, that'll keep you going to meetings. That'll keep your ego in check. Called me from the plane when he got off in Bend, Oregon. I said, so what are you going to do? He said, I'm going home to see my boys. See, when he called me and asked me to throw his bail, and I told him no, the next call I got was from my grandsons, they're 9 and 11, asking when Daddy's coming home. I had to tell him I don't know. Keep your feet in the fire that long. He called me from the airport. He says, I'm going to go home, I'm going to see my boys, and I'm going to a meeting to find a sponsor. And that's what he did. He called me about 2 weeks later and he said, Dad, I found a sponsor, and he told me some of the conversations they'd had. Apparently this is a great man in AA who knows just exactly how to cut through the crap with him, and he's really helped him a lot. And he says, Dad, I went looking for a sponsor who works a program like you do. He'd have never asked the question of me if I had been an unsafe place for the information. If I'd have been making loving observations about his drinking and his behavior or the source of his problems, he'd have never called me and said, Dad, I need help. What do I do? I'd have never got that call. What I did instead was what you guys told me, is I found somebody who was willing to take his call, who was qualified to help him by virtue of being an alcoholic, and I kept it in my wallet until he asked the question. If you got somebody out there who's still drinking and still doing it, and you want more than anything for them to be sober, the best thing you can do, whether you're AA or Al-Anon, if they're close to you, you can't help them, is to find somebody who will and put that number in your pocket. And the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life is to wait for the question. But it's the only choice that we have. Today I have a good life. My wife and I, she's got a lot of problems, physical problems. Getting old is not for sissies. She's been very critically ill. She was on chemo for 3 years. She's fixing to go back on it. We're still both members in good standing in Al-Anon and AA. We stay busy. We sponsor a lot of people. If you came to our house knowing what was going on with special needs kids, that's another whole story I don't have time to tell you. You would assume, like I would assume, that people in there would be victims of something. But there's not a victim in my house. There's not a victim in my house. We live life every day like living large, loving life and living large, because of recovery, because of sobriety in my home, because we have the benefit of 2 of us with a program to work and resources to rely on when the other one's not available. Do you suffer from the delusion that marriages and relationships are supposed to be 50-50? Hello. They're not. Some days I can't show up. Some days she can't show up. Some days it's 60-40. Some days it's 90-10. We show up and do the job we're supposed to do and keep the ego out of the way. That I have resources. If she's not good for a hug because she's feeling combative, I can go to a meeting and get a hug from my sponsor or from somebody I sponsor. If I'm not available to her because of stuff going on, she's got all these resources. We got these complete, whole, separate lives. We are what you guys taught us to be. We're not the myth that the society gives us, which is that you take somebody who can't deal with their finances and balance their checkbook, and you put them together with that other friend of yours who's a CPA and really good with money, that they're going to be a whole entity, that they're going to heal each other, that their broken parts are going to blend together. What happens for us is that when you put 2 broken people in a relationship, you have 2 broken people in a relationship. that my only job in my marriage is to show up as a guy who's whole, self-supporting, self-sufficient, in recovery, a whole human being, in the hopes that she will too, and that we have a chance at a successful relationship. I'm a very blessed man to tell you today that that's what I have. And I'm out of time. Thank you.